Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Chersky at the Ted Stevens Center, and it is my privilege to serve as today's host for this Arctic Connections podcast live stream coming here live from the Stevens Center broadcast studios. For those who are joining us for the first time, the Stevens Center the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies is the Department of War's newest regional center focused on the Arctic region. Located in Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, here in Anchorage, the Stevens Center builds on the legacy of our namesake, Senator Ted Stevens, who, of course, was a legendary contributor to U.S. and Allied Arctic security and defense, who served more than 6 decades in the American public sector, beginning as a pilot in World War II. The Stevens Center provides an international venue for bilateral and multilateral engagement, research, and education involving U.S. and Allied and the military and defense practitioners, utilizing our unique academic forums such as involving analytical and engagement and academic forums to build strong, sustainable, and strategic international networks of defense and security leaders. As such, via innovation and experimentation, the Stevens Center provides networks and solutions to prepare practitioners in Arctic allied security and defense. A keystone of this collaborative approach is the Stevens Center's National and Arctic Interest Chairs program. National chairs hail from the United States, allies, and partners abroad, representing the Arctic nations and more. Arctic Interest Chairs, of course, bring functional expertise from areas such as international law, state governments, industry, scientific research, engineering infrastructure, and the U.S. military. These chairs contribute their insights to all Stevens Center mission areas, which includes, of course, education, research, analysis, and strategic engagement. And their affiliation with the Stevens Center enriches, of course, our center, as well as their work in their home institutions and countries. Today, I'm joined by 2 of our esteemed Arctic Interest Chairs as part of the program. Our Arctic Energy and Economics Chair, the former Lieutenant Governor and the former Chair of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, and so much more, Mr. Mead Treadwell. And with a long history of service across the state of Alaska, to include, of course, we're in the last stages, completing a 2nd term as governor of a great state of Alaska, the Honorable Governor Mike Dunleavy. Gentlemen, welcome to the Stevens Center.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
These distinguished Alaskans share the Stevens Center's commitment to promote dialogue, education, research, and collaboration in Arctic security and defense. Their support and their partnership brings Alaskans' perspectives to the national and international conversation on the growing strategic and security importance of the Arctic region. So I'm going to get into several questions here, and we'll make this free-flowing. We also appreciate folks joining us on this live stream. And by utilizing the principles of the webinar approach, so this will be a conversation amongst us, and the folks who join us online can just enjoy the conversation, but they will not be contributing. Of course, let me start to you, Governor Dunleavy, the following question. The most strategic place on planet Earth, Alaska's geostrategic importance. In his 1935 testimony to Congress, former Brigadier General and retired Colonel Billy Mitchell called Alaska the most important strategic place in the world, principally recognizing Alaska's role in the emerging regime of air power. Governor, from your vantage point, why is Alaska's location so significant globally to include those aspects about the Arctic region? Your reflections.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, we are roughly 9 hours, 8.5 hours, 9 hours to every industrialized place in the Northern Hemisphere. So, for example, you can fly from Anchorage to Frankfurt, Germany, about 8 hours, 8.5 hours. It's probably a shorter route than it is going to Miami. Similar time going over to Japan. When you look at the globe, and when I say you position it properly, where Alaska is at the center of the universe, you can see what we're talking about. We're the northernmost state. I often tell people we're the westernmost state. We're the easternmost state because of where we converge in the Arctic and the Pacific. So we're so far north and close to our adversaries. For example, Russia's only 2.5 miles between 2 islands, the Dye meets, and 50 miles between coast to coast. And so that's also why our international cargo airport is #1 in the nation now and #3 in the world because of our location on the globe. So that location is absolutely key. Billy Mitchell was right. I know he was being court-martialed at the time for advocating for air superiority over naval, and you know how politics works sometimes, even the military. But nonetheless, he was correct, and we're seeing that at play every day. And as I mentioned, the airport went from second busiest in the country to first here this spring. And so I think you're going to see more and more of our location become central to policy strategy going into the future.
Thank you for that, Governor. Let me just try one, if you will, follow-up to that, and then I'll pitch it over to Meade for further reflections. When you think about it from your vantage point, Governor, of Alaska geography and the position as where it's located in advancing international collaboration with what we deem in the center called Arctic Pacific, but looking westward as we're at the top of the Pacific Rim, looking westward and southwards towards Japan, the Republic of Korea, Australia, and Taiwan. How do you think this position here benefits that international collaboration between our country, North America, and into the Arctic Pacific?
Well, it's our proximity again. I mean, we're roughly 1,000 miles closer to Australia than California is, and people have a hard time getting their arms around that. And the reason is our westward projection is so great that it offsets how far north we are when it comes to relation to Australia. So we are the forward-leaning, quote, base, Alaska, for pretty much any activity that happens here in the Indo-Pacific, as they would say, as well as the Arctic. So again, you can see where that location comes into play. If there's a problem in East Asia, it's going to be Alaska that probably the assets come from first. And again, our trading partners are generally with our Asian allies. Our exports are with our Asian allies. It's proximity again, it's location on the globe. And again, you know, as we're moving our gas concepts and gas assets, our proximity to Asia in right now uncontested waters with the 7th Fleet, the 3rd Fleet, et cetera, ideally positions Alaska to assist our Asian allies and respond when there's something that nefarious that occurs.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that, Governor. Meade, let me look to you for this one from your vantage point, looking beyond geography. When you think about Alaska being strategically important from a homeland defense vantage point, thinking about the training spaces we have here, energy, of course, that still remains largely untapped in many places, minerals, and our proximity to space. Your thoughts on this?
We have played a major role in U.S. security from back before the Cold War. And as Billy Mitchell predicted then, if there's going to be any kind of aviation invasion into the United States, it would come across the Arctic, certainly come across Alaska. If you take a look at missile threats to the United States, a lot of that is the reason why we have the major ballistic missile defense at Fort Greely. There's a little bit down in California, but that's about it. If you take a look at emerging threats, which could be drones, could be cruise missiles, again, Alaska is the bulwark there, and it's our radars in places like Shemya and Clear, and working with Northern Greenland and Fylingdales, England. That's we are essentially that dew line that was put in during the Cold War is now is getting to be more up to date over the horizon radars. And so for even strategic issues, that's significant. And then in terms of a powerful country, a country that projects power, needs to project power with a strong economy. We are part of making America a strong economy with our energy, with our minerals. And as the governor said, we trade with Asia considerably. We would never have gotten a timber industry started without Japan. We would not have gotten a gas industry exported without Japan. We are very much involved in minerals trade in Asia. And even the airport, which the governor talked about, it's a lot of Asian airplanes selling goods to Europe and North America that stop here for gas.
You know, just to follow on, you know, as Meade was talking about strategic assets, our proximity to Asia, et cetera. You know, just a few years ago, we actually had to deal with some low-tech intrusions, right? Balloons.
Right.
A lot of people forget about that. You know, there's still questions as to what the balloons were carrying, but that's another conversation for another time. But nonetheless, and as Meade mentioned, Alaska pioneered LNG export for the world. In 1969. There was a plant in Algeria, 64, that would send gas intermittently to Europe, but nonstop shipments occurred from Alaska to Tokyo. Again, highlighting our proximity, as we brought up in terms of energy. So we really are central to the Arctic and the Pacific. And we really are central as America's forward-leaning true fort in this part of the world.
That's critically important. And I look at this, let me just pull the thread a little bit further then. When you think about the strategic value of where we're at and what we've been able to provide, as you mentioned, in minerals and really this economic benefit for both our nation and the Arctic Pacific, what are the things that, as you think, and just thinking through this a little bit ad hoc, when you look to some of the coming innovations, whether it's in the energy sector, whether it's in telecommunications, how can we better leverage this strategic place for those emerging markets of international commerce when we think about energy, telecommunications, and more? Anything you'd like to add to that?
First off, on energy, I served as lieutenant governor about 4 years before the governor became governor, but all of us in Alaska have worked intensely to try to get more production out of the North Slope. Mm-hmm. When you go to Asia, Korea and Japan especially, they have been looking at buying Russian gas, more Russian gas, and they are prepared. They want to use near Arctic resources, and so the fact that we've been working on that is significant. The idea that we can actually get more production. I'm kind of a veteran of Exxon Valdez, and we set up the SERV system in Prince William Sound, and we spend over $100 million a year as Alaskans. It comes out of our royalties. It comes out of the oil company's returns to make sure that that oil is secure leaving our state. There's now more oil passing by us from Canada going to China and Russia going to China without any protection at all. And you think about this, we have to get back in the game and compete more solidly in energy, and I think we will. We're getting the decisions and the production to make that make sense. So just paying attention to that geography, we're going to be using new technologies. And whether it's a pipeline or both, there's enough gas for lots of different projects. So there's several different prospects being looked at, some of which use new ice-breaking technology the Russians pioneered, and we'll see what happens there. When it comes to fiber optics, there's a huge set of investments in fiber optics that are being done both onshore and offshore in Alaska. And one of the things I love about the fiber optics is there's an experiment going on now between Valdez and Cordova, where the optic line itself is a sensor that helps us track ships and whales and things like that. And that's a cool new technology. We are seeing, I have to give the governor credit because I'll give him credit on a lot of things, but the point is, as we've been in the gas dialogue with Japan, which we began, almost 8 years ago, mm-hmm. Governor, together, the Japanese said, we'd like to find a way to bring back CO2. And the governor put through a piece of legislation, and the DNR has been working on this so that we can actually return CO2 if needed. And that may end up being a resource later for sustainable aviation fuel. And we've talked about that too. So you'll see these changes in technology happening. There's a lot also happening with catalysts that can help decarbonize. So I believe that fossil fuels are going to get cleaner over time. I also will tell you that anything that has been done to reduce carbon dioxide has been from switching from coal or oil to natural gas in power plants. And so we're going to be part of that wave continuing. And we're also a great place to pioneer other new technologies. Small nuclear power is an example. Geothermal, major scale geothermal in the United States is an example. And I think we've got a great set of options.
Sure. And just to build on what Mead said on, international fiber. Alaska's positioned again on the globe to be the data transportation center for North America, Asia, and Europe, quite frankly. And there's a number of initiatives working on that, but can you imagine fiber coming from Asia right to Alaska, with landings in Alaska, and then fiber going to lower 48. Again, we have fiber that we do that now with, but enhanced fiber for future data farms and AI, and then going over to Europe. That is going to be a tremendous, I think, opportunity, not just for commercial, but also military as well. May mentioned something about between Cordova and Valdez, they're tracking ships with that fiber. We're also going to have to be careful because once we lay fiber, our adversaries are going to be trying to figure out a way how to tap those lines for data. So it's a continual technological race between them and us. And again, that's just one example. And I'm glad he brought that up. But all kinds of technology. I mean, AI is just rapidly moving forward across all sectors, whether it's oil, gas, military, you name it. Drones, obviously, the Ukrainians have demonstrated the technology that needs to we need to get ahead of, including anti-drone technology.
Right.
But in the end, we're going to need a lot of these technologies because we're also experiencing a demographic decline. The world is experiencing a demographic decline. Boomers are starting to retire. So if we are going to have a world with fewer and fewer people, you're certainly going to have to up the game with technology. And we'd like to be a leader. Alaska would be. I know the United States needs to be a leader because if we're not, our adversaries will be.
Right. Right. And it's best to retain the initiative since we already have it, just retain it, not to lose the initiative to our adversaries, to be sure. I would like to, first of all, thanks for your reflections on this aspect of really kind of laying this foundation of where this state sits within the U.S. Arctic and really within the geostrategic importance of things that matter that relate to both North America and into the Indo-Pacific, which we nomenclaturally call the Arctic Pacific region. I'd like to take a look from the military vantage point, thinking back of how we can leverage the past to learn towards the future. And thinking about our military history from the vantage point of where Alaska's role it played in World War II and, of course, during the Cold War. So, Meade, I'll start this first one, the question to you, and thinking about through the historical lens of this place, which was established in the latter part of the 1930s and got underway substantially in the early 1940s, where we're sitting right here on J-Bear. How did World War II and the Aleutians Campaign change the U.S. strategic thinking on Alaska, and of course also thinking about the tactical thinking on cold weather warfare?
Well, that's a big one, but I was just saying here
Got
at
a big brain, so
here at the Stevens Center, when I'm done with all the books that were written around that time to help, we were losing B-29 pilots to frostbite. We had to upgrade many of our casualties in the Aleutian campaign came because the soldiers sent up here were not properly equipped. And even the exercises that go on today, the big winter exercises in the training grounds around Fort Greely, there's still things to be learned about cold weather operations. And we talked about that on the radio a few weeks ago.
Sure.
But I think what we learned is that first off, the Japanese attacked the Aleutians because they wanted to make sure that they had some sort of resistance for an invasion of Japan. And it's Billy Mitchell in reverse. Mm-hmm. They saw Alaska as a very important pathway and taking the Aleutians was part of their sense of defending their homeland. Just talking about geography, that Japan is now a very good friend, and they realize how important it is with Alaska, with our military resources as part of defending the Pacific. But we learned that very solidly in World War II. Another thing we learned after World War II and the Cold War is if you take a look at the infrastructure that the military has built here, it's not just a logistics infrastructure, it's not just a defense infrastructure, it's also an intelligence collection infrastructure. Believe it or not, Alaskans have been fairly heavily involved in briefing Ukraine on what the Russians are doing because we have the listening stations around here. And I wouldn't know that unless it were public, so I'm able to say that. But our radars are important for ballistic missile defense. Our DEW line is now increasingly important because of these low-level threats like drones and cruise missiles. And so what we learned in the Cold War and the beginnings of these data collection, situational awareness apparatus, that's actually pretty strong now for the defense of the entire country.
If I can just build on it, it's interesting. I think the key takeaway for me is the federal government, Department of War, et cetera, and I think they're moving in that direction, need to be more proactive instead of reactive. In 1905, when I think it was Admiral Togo in Japan took out the Russian Imperial fleet in a battle in the Pacific, it opened up eyes, but there wasn't much change impacting the Pacific. At that time, Hawaii was kind of a focus for, I think, military, right? The 7th Fleet was based there at one time, except we know the whole story of Pearl Harbor. But when Hawaii was attacked, and then Doolittle did his raid, ironically, on a B-25 Mitchell to Japan in April. And then you had the Battle of Midway, in which the Aleutians were invaded at the same time. We can then see that Alaska took on a much more importance, as well as the Lend-Lease, where we would backdoor the aircraft to the Russians, right? You have a lot of bases in Alaska now, little communities that are 8,000 foot long wide because of World War II. But we always seem to, once the crisis was over, we always seem to recede from anticipating the next crisis. I think we're getting beyond that with the icebreakers. I know that's not military, that's basically commercial or Homeland Security. But I think you're going to see, and I appreciate the work that, for example, Senator Sullivan is doing, getting resources here in Alaska. We need to prepare for what the future is going to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And that future is going to be incredibly interesting because we don't know where the technology is going to take us. But we do know that Alaska will always be center to our security. And we can no longer retreat once the crisis is over because we have to anticipate what those next crises are.
And just to that point, as the Stevens Center was getting started, I remember helping broker a visit from a Japanese admiral who had written a paper that said, just talking about the 1905, he said, if Russia had the Northern Sea Route at that time for resupply, Japan would have lost that war rather than had it. And talking with our Asian allies about Arctic shipping now is important. And Governor, you and I have talked about this a lot over the last 8 years. And the point is that if we don't have a presence in the Arctic, and that's why getting these icebreakers is important, that's why getting these ports are important, that's why realizing that, yes, you're right, Governor, that if you put in a fiber, it can be a target as well as an asset. But the fact is that everything that we do in the North is got a dual use. If we're civil authorities, we're looking to try to get better ports for places like Nome or Port Clarence or Cape Blossom near Kotzebue or in the Arctic or out in Adak and so forth. And that's part of what has been my job and his job still as an Alaska leader. But at the same time, we know we're also creating a presence and opportunities for our military, and whether it's communications, fuel, power, oil spill response, all of that's important for dual use. And so Alaskans have, you're right, there are 8,000-foot runways where a small village may not need it, but, Cold Bay, it is an alternate point for jets that are flying nonstop from New York to Tokyo. So we keep the snow plowed.
Yep.
Conflict's going to come if you're not prepared. Meaning, if your adversaries think you don't care or you haven't prepared, you can pretty much anticipate conflict. And so, again, I think it's going to be incredibly important for us to, and Meade brought up a very good point, to not just talk about it, but to actually come up with the 5 and 10 and 15-year plans. Building the Arctic is going to be expensive. Operating the Arctic is going to be expensive. It's going to be more expensive if you're not prepared. If you can project not just our assets under the ice, which we know, submarines, et cetera, and not just in the air, which we've got a fantastic, we have fantastic air assets, but you have to have a presence, as you mentioned, on the ground. You have to have the ports. You have to have the airports. You have to have the continual funding. Once you do that, in the end, you minimize conflict. You save money and resource because you're limiting your conflicts. But you also take ownership over the fact that you've recognized that Alaska, we're not going to be reactive anymore, but we're going to be proactive.
Please,
I'm going to give you an example. And when you talk about this, had we had LNG going, and God knows we've tried.
We still are.
For a long time. And we are.
Give up a ship.
But the point of it is, when Ukraine started, all of a sudden, Russian gas supplies were cut off to Europe, and much of what we were producing in the Gulf ended up going to Europe.
Yeah.
And the Europeans ended up building very fast LNG receiving facilities. And the fact is that we could have also served that going across the Arctic Ocean, possibly, if that icebreaker capability was there.
Yeah.
We actually helped fill in, we could have helped fill in the blanks in Asia. And when it comes to oil, likewise, with the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, if we had that production capability, it's pretty important. I was even in a meeting, Governor, I never talked to you about it personally, but others in your government, where most of the coking coal that the steel mills of Asia use comes from Russia. And we've got a beautiful coal prospect in Northwest Alaska, not too far from Red Dog. And if we have these capabilities and we do them right environmentally, we do them right in protecting subsistence uses, we can be a much better player in a world where you've got to be flexible.
Right. You know, again, it's interesting because, again, what Meade was saying on our ability to support our allies in Asia, we have bases in Asia that, to some degree, run on Russian gas. That's a problem.
It is.
So from a national security strategic perspective, we should be shipping gas to Asia for them. We should be using our own gas in state. We should be using our own coal, which we are, and I hope that expands. But in the end, because we are the second largest discontiguous piece of property in the world, ironically, Greenland is the first, then Alaska, from our home nation, we've got to be self-sufficient. We've got to be proactive. We've got to look to the future because we know from history what can happen and make sure we have the energy for us, our Asian allies, making sure we have the technology, the infrastructure, the ports, I think is key.
Well, and food security, too.
100%.
There's been a lot on that and we're having a bit of a crisis in our fisheries, and some part of that crisis, I'm sure, is caused by Russian actions.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And Chinese as well.
And Chinese as well. And that's one place where the Homeland Security and the national security come together.
Yeah.
Well, this actually, if I caught by their aspect about preparedness and resilience, to think about the infrastructure. We obviously in the 1990s, we had the base realignment and closures that really did kind of, seed away infrastructure or mothball infrastructure that was critical to win the Cold War. I think about strategic places like ADAC. Even the Coast Guard station out at Natu back in the day, 4 stations for fighter operations, the Glean and King Salmon. Those places in the past are relevant today. And thinking of pulling that thread further from you, Governor, as you think about this and tying this aspect about dual or multi-use aspects to a civil mill, if you will, in the broader sense, ways to get at this in a way that ultimately brings the communities together between the state of Alaska, energy sectors, industry, et cetera, that are also tying in with defense and security. That dual or multiple use infrastructure is maybe a key to offset some of the costs associated with reestablishing a broader infrastructure network that supports, at the end of the day, security and defense. Things like this, I think, as we unpack to the future, ultimately requires the funding. It also requires a prioritization. What do you fund first? What do you fund later down the sequence? What's on that?
So we have secretaries and undersecretaries from the administration come up to Alaska. When they come to Alaska, their view of Alaska changes dramatically. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. You needed a sign to say you were in New Jersey, or you needed a sign to say you were in New York. You don't need a sign to know you're in Alaska. Yeah. So when they come up here, and they see the vastness, they see the Arctic, they see the temperate rainforest in Juneau, they see the Aleutians, they see all this. Almost all the time they go, now I get it. Mm-hmm. Now I get it. And so having more of a presence and bringing up more, not just military, but politicians to Alaska, because what they don't understand is, what do you mean it's going to cost 4 times to build a road in Alaska? How do we afford that? What do you mean it's going to cost 5 times to build a port? You have to see it to understand it. You have to see where we have to transport the materials from. We're still cleaning up Typhoon Merbok. I can go to a store in Florida where they have hurricanes all the time. But a 2x4 there is going to be 8 times cheaper than a 2x4 we get out to where the people were affected by Merbok. The costs are simply going to be higher. You've got to bake that into your thinking and your planning and your strategy. If you do that, we will be proactive. But if you're going to fall back on a 2x4 is cheaper in Florida, yeah, but Florida isn't in the Arctic.
Right.
And that's what they need to think about.
Governor, you're right. And this actually ties closely into the next question I want to pitch to you, because obviously, as you mentioned, I keep thinking the vision of Harry Brower talking about his $800 door that he buys to get, down here at Lowe's to get it to Utiave's. His door is now $800 to be delivered to his house. And this key aspect of, critical aspect of logistics is everything, how much expenses it costs, but the cost is worth it when you would think about what we're securing as a result of it. So if I think about this and think about through that lens of the Cold War, thinking how this reshaped the Homeland Defense mission, when we think about how the Cold War reshapes our Homeland Defense mindset, specifically when we think about pulling that thread forward from then to now, how do you think that this impacts Alaska when we start thinking about Homeland Defense from Alaska vantage point through the lens of the Cold War? What did we learn from that?
A couple things. Because of the invasion by the Japanese and because of the Cold War, Alaska became a state at the height of the Cold War. Our own state constitution was formed by that conflict.
Right.
They formed a very powerful, unified executive under the governor. We don't elect our attorney generals. We don't elect our department heads. They're all appointed by me. Our framers recognized the menace on our borders. Also recognized they saw what happened during the invasion by the Japanese and how slow the territorial government worked to address that. So they want to make sure that the Alaskan government can move quickly in terms of disasters, crisis, that sort of thing. So our Constitution was formed as a result of the Cold War and what happened with Japan. Going forward, I introduced an appropriation to train up and grow our state defense force. In Alaska, you have National Guard, you have military, you have naval militia, and you have a state defense force. Most of those people, or many of those people, are located in rural Alaska. Mm-hmm. If we train them up to be able to run the power plants, to be able to weld, to be able to use heavy equipment, you have a ready force asset, not just to deal with natural disasters, but like World War II, when the Alaska Territorial Guard was set up, you've got people that are trained and prepared for, as opposed to reacting to. And so I think the key for me is, how do we get our U.S. government, how do we get our state officials to continually look at Alaska, not as something to react to, but something to capitalize on so that we can minimize conflict and maximize the resource that we're going to put into Alaska.
Critical aspect on this, Governor. Meade, would you like to unpack a bit more on that?
I was just going to say, I served with Sean Parnell when he was governor. And one thing that he was very, very serious about is we came over here to the National Guard base, and we would have cabinet meetings in the Situation Room there. And we would practice for earthquakes. We would practice for tsunami. The governor and I stayed up all night on the phone practically watching when Japan had that giant thing in March of 2011. And we did lose one Alaskan. He happened to be in Sendai rather than in Alaska. But it was very important for us to have that capability. We had a big flood in Galena, several big forest fires. So the governor, just even before you took office, you'd been elected,
earthquake.
We had a giant earthquake, and you were out here yourself rather than doing transition. And the point being is that we have to practice this interagency work with federal government, with communities all the time. And I think that makes us better prepared than, say, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. I haven't been to Scranton in a long, long time, so I don't know how well they're prepared. But all I could say is that we practice this all the time because of floods, fires, earthquakes, tsunamis, oil spills, and it's very, very important.
We had a National Red Cross individual tell us on our work on Murbach that we did coordination better than any place they've ever seen. And we have to. We had 85 natural and man-made disasters in my last 7.5 years. 85 of them. Typhoons, earthquakes, landslides, fires, floods, you name it. Everything but locust was thrown.
Yeah, kept the locusts off.
We got mosquitoes. But no, exactly what Maede's saying. The coordination, the practice, the assets in place, the training, all need to happen.
Governor, I'm close friends with your Adjutant General, who also serves as your Commissioner for Military and Veterans Affairs, General Sachs. And Tori is, I can certainly know that when bad things happen and your life gets complicated, I know he's running the sound of guns to try to help that response. The resilience and the well-oiled machine you have emergency response here is quite fantastic.
He's amazing, and his people are amazing. Between him and their disaster response unit, Brian Fisher has run that for some
Brian's
time.
Fantastic.
Our Department of Transportation that helps us rebuild, and other cabinets and departments. We've got this disaster thing down pretty good, unfortunately, but fortunately. We have it down pretty good, unfortunately, because we don't want to have it happen. But you have to. You have to be ready for it. And we've got the assets, a lot of the assets in place and training. Just want to train more of our people in rural Alaska, like I said, in the State Defense Force, so that they're there. Right. And when we went out to Typhoon Murbach, Halong was the last one, but Typhoon Murbach, we were met in the villages by SDF individuals, ready to go. If we had more of them, I think our response could be even quicker. And in the event of a conflict, those people will be there as assets as well.
Well, Governor, this really gives me 100% agree with this. And I think about, I've been living in Alaska since I retired from the Air Force in 2015, so coming up in 11 years now. And as I think about SDF from 2015 to 16 time, it was very, very minimal. SDF has been a growth industry across rural Alaska. And this really gets to my next question, I think, because much of this, and you, of course, have spent, I remember, 8 years of your life in Arctic Alaska.
Yeah, 19 near Arctic, between the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue.
So you would definitely be called a long-term Arctic resident from my vantage point, or near or Arctic resident for the sake of the argument. So you have that perspective of what rural Alaska is like, spending so many years in rural Alaska. Much of the state's military history was written in rural Alaska. Historically, from your vantage point, Governor, what has military engagement meant for rural communities in Alaska, and how have they supported the military's Arctic capability?
Well, first of all, our rural Alaskans are probably some of the most patriotic people in the country, by far. As a percentage, when you look at the Native Alaskan population, probably more have served in the military than the general population. As was mentioned, the long runways that were created out there assist rural Alaska. King Sam and Galena, Gustavus, you name it, assist rural Alaska. The AGT, ATG, the Alaska Territorial Guard, people were trained up, 7,000 almost, as a response to the Japanese invasion and the Aleutians. Many are in our National Guard. We want more in our National Guard. But they want to do their part. Again, but they see the, every once in a while, we're proactive out in rural Alaska. And then if it looks like something is not going to happen, we recede. The funding goes back and forth when it comes to our military assets in the Guard, whether it's the SDF, whether it's the Naval Militia, you name it. I'm hoping we get to a point, and once again, we introduced an initiative to do that. At the time, the legislature didn't take it up. But training these people up so that they're the ones that are on the ground, they're the ones that are communicating with whatever command there is. Yep. They're the ones that are making sure that when somebody from Washington comes out there, these people know their land. They know the landscape. They know the people there. I think they're a tremendous asset that we need to, I think, grow even further.
Agree with that. I mean, your reflections on this. Unpack this a bit further.
As you know, I left government in 2014. I joined the private sector. And among the things I've done in the private sector is work on telecommunications. Yeah. And state of Alaska has land mobile radio, and we've got all sorts of things that kind of cover the rail belt, but not rural Alaska. So I've worked with one of the satellite companies, but I have watched them all. Mm-hmm. And we're doing a lot to extend telecommunications for emergency response. We're doing a lot to extend capabilities for search and rescue right now, that are significant. And not only has the governor been working on the territorial or the State Defense Force, but also I have to say we rely a lot on the Civil Air Patrol for search and rescue, and I've been talking with them about ways they can upgrade their communications too. So when you take a look at, there's places in this state where you can't even reach the Coast Guard by radio. along our coast where we may be fishing. And you can by satellite, but I mean the fact is that we've got to build up that capability, and the training. Governor, one of the really memorable experiences I had as lieutenant governor is I flew to Indiana to welcome back an Alaska National Guard unit that had been deployed in Afghanistan. And their mission had been nation building, helping villages. And one guy from a rural Alaska village said, now that I've helped get wells in this place on the other side of the world, it's helped me understand how I can do the infrastructure here at home.
Makes sense.
Early in my career, I worked at DEC. We're still trying to get water and wastewater in a lot of communities upgraded. And frankly, building the capabilities in rural Alaska is going to help make rural Alaska sustainable.
Yeah.
Well, you hit on the aspect, Governor, and media hit on this bit as well, is that the resilience of rural Alaska to be able to contribute to our state security and ultimately our national security across the Arctic region is kind of a critical and largely underappreciated, perhaps, at least from Washington's vantage point, because of just not necessarily knowing. The depth of patriotism across rural Alaska is remarkable, truly the case. And these folks, let me finish and over to you, Mead. But as I think about the aspects of how we put capabilities in the hands of folks that are living, and I'm going to use the term Arctic sentinels, that live across our Arctic shorelines. They have the ability to monitor, to really observe what things are going on, and know what right looks like and what something's not right, what that looks like as well, and then having the capability to respond, I think is kind of critical here. As you think about this message that we can maybe work, back to the department, but ultimately back in Washington at large, things that would really help as enablers to that. I mean, things that, whether it's communications or whether it's training, equipment, logistics materials, what would the things that you would put at the top of that list mean?
I like to go back to two words: Arctic presence. Mm-hmm. All right. If we have a civilian Arctic presence, if we're working to develop our resources, if we're working to have safe shipping, if we're working to have spill response where you don't have it in Western Alaska, if we're doing these things on the civil side, that also takes away a vacuum on the security side. Mm-hmm. I've always said, as I was advocating for the Arctic, I was chair of the Arctic Research Commission for several years before I was lieutenant governor, and the argument was the Arctic is like a place where it's our ocean and it's their ocean and everybody else's, but if your parents leave you a cabin in the woods and your brother's near the cabin and you're hundreds of miles away, who do you think sets the rules at the cabin, right? And if we're not present in the Arctic, if we're not setting up standards for safe shipping and safe mining and safe oil and gas development, the world's going to set them without us. Yeah. And we need to be present there. And so Alaska's sustainable development agenda, and Governor, I just have to say that your conference on this issue years in a row has been very, very helpful for all of this. That's very, very important for our security agenda.
Just to build on it, what Mead's saying when he was talking is you can't just talk about it, because if you do, it's just an academic exercise.
Right.
You have to do it.
Right.
I was talking to a military person, not to be mentioned, when we had heard that the Chinese were looking at a new generation fighter. And I'm going to paraphrase to make a point, but I said, doesn't that worry you? He goes, not really. I said, why? The Chinese have not been in active warfare since 1978 when they had that incursion into North Korea. It was a tank war.
Yeah.
And on paper, they're doing a tremendous number of things, but America's been in active war almost since World War II. What does that mean? On this base today, you have generations of soldiers that may have been in Iraq 1, Afghanistan, Iraq 2, and now we have a conflict with Iran. What's my point? They just don't talk about warfare. They live it. They meld the technology, the tactics, the strategy all together, which has made the United States the premier military presence on the globe. You're seeing that happen now with the Ukrainians. Who would have thought the Ukrainians would hold back the Russians? their independent work on strategy, tactics, drone warfare is going to be amazing. We're learning from that. So what's the point? You can't talk about it. You can talk about it till you're blue in the face, but unless you do it, especially in the Arctic, right? I was thinking about this, and I'll try and wrap it up here. You know, you have Arctic training, Arctic warfare. You have jungle training, jungle warfare. You have desert training, desert warfare. Those two places don't change every 6 months like we do.
Right.
You got to know how to conduct warfare in the Arctic when it's 60 below and everything is frozen. You got to know how to conduct warfare in the Arctic when it's 80 above, 70 above, and it's not frozen. You don't have to do that per se in the jungles. You don't have to do that per se in the desert. So
Right.
Alaska's a unique environment in which it changes constantly. You have to do it if you really want to become the experts at it. And so I think Meet's point is don't talk about it. We got to start to actually plan this thing out.
Amen. And ultimately, from when I look at how much things change, you get cold and frozen and dark, and you got light, wet, and soggy, and with bugs the size of aircraft carriers. So when you look about this, in fact, actually, just even that myself was a couple of years ago, I had colleagues in the Department of Homeland Security up in Ukhtavik, where it was height of summer, and if you got down below out of the breeze, you're covered in mosquitoes, and Alaskans are kind of used to that. You just work your way through it. My colleagues were mildly, the heart palpitations because what am I going to do with these thousands of mosquitoes just land on me real quick? So resilience is of multiple aspects, and you've got to be able to, for multiple environments or multiple. What the Arctic is today is not the Arctic, 6 months from now, to be sure. Talking has its point to prepare conditions for doing, but without doing, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So,
Well, I'm just going to say the unique thing about the Stevens Center is I started working on security issues in the Reagan administration on energy, and then on missile defense with Governor Hickel at the Institute of the North. And so we did a lot with the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, now the Inouye Center. Mm-hmm. And then we did a whole bunch over in some of the think tanks in Europe on missile defense in Europe. And it was the North Korean threat and the Iranian threat, maybe an Iraqi threat that we were all concerned about.
Right.
I had this conversation with Senator Stevens, and he said, we really need our own center because the Arctic brings all these entities together. And I was just in Arctic Norway, which has actually got, they've hunkered down security-wise with the Russians in ways that I did not expect. It's the first time I'd been to Svalbard in 20 years, and it is getting tighter and tenser there. And the fact is that we had a lot of conversations about proximity in the Arctic and how Alaska might be part of something there. So what you're doing here, it's not only just part of the doing, but it's part of the education on the geography. It's part, I like every other Alaskan leader has been accused of bridges to nowhere, I've said, hey, we got two of the longest rivers in America. One has no bridges across it, and one has only one. You're going to be hearing from us for a while about roads and bridges, and I'm not ashamed to ask for it. That's where we come from.
Well, we're going to unpack this a bit further as we think about the way forward here in the last bit of this webinar. And think about Alaska's role in the future Homeland Defense and Arctic security. But I'm going to look at it from the pan-Arctic vantage point. The Stevens Center's region of interest, if you will, extends and really the networks we're working on extends from the Bering Straits to the 800-mile Russian-Finnish border on the Finnish side. So, if you will, the Allied Arctic region from the Bering Straits to that Russian-Finnish border. As we think about this, and ultimately in the Nordic countries, they look at total defense as their homeland defense equation set. It is an all-of-nation, and it's laser focused for the most part about the Russian threat. We think about our homeland defense is priority job one for the Department of War. Defending the American homeland is our number one job. We are, as a center, are assigned directly to the Secretary of War for Homeland Defense and American Security Affairs. Alaska's role in this future homeland future homeland defense and Arctic security and defense really, from my vantage, hinges on one obviously new development, this aspect about Golden Dome. Thinking about the missile defense architecture built during the Cold War, and then thinking about transposing what is Golden Dome. Any thoughts regarding this? I'll start with you, Governor Dunleavy. You would think how importance of Golden Dome and what Alaska can do to help set conditions for the department and really realizing Golden Dome. And that's not just a continental U.S. thing, it's really a North American thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be another advancement in technology and technological asset for Alaska, for North America, for our Canadian friends, and potentially in the future, possibly even for our Asian allies. Alaska, once again, is uniquely placed to be able to be part of the development of this because we have wide open spaces for testing. We have the Pacific for testing. We have our own spaceport that is going to be tied in, I think, pretty tight to what happens with Golden Dome. But we can do so much in Alaska, again, in the research part of it, the testing part of it, that you can't do in the lower 48. And again, what happened after World War II and the Cold War, with the DEW line system that we had, early warning system, a distance early warning system, we became Alaska was going to be the early warning to let the lower 48 know that there was going to be an incoming missile. What we've shown up in Delta, and as Meade said, we have the assets in Delta. I think Vandenberg has a lot less missiles than we do, but we have the assets up there to intercept in space. This takes it, I think, to the next generation. And I think Alaska is really positioned to be the lead on that, where a lot of those technologies, tactics, and even strategy can be developed that can be applied to other parts of the world.
Fantastic. Meade, any further reflections?
I can just only fill in with specifics.
Okay.
We have some empty silos at Greeley waiting for the next generation interceptor. We hope it comes soon. We have upgrades to our radars because of the low flying issues, and that's money that's being spent now in our communities in the bush. We have upgrades to our major strategic radars over the horizon, also to watch those things. And as the governor mentioned, our spaceport is actually, it's not just Kodiak anymore. It's Kodiak plus tracking east and west and north. It's possible launches out of Licktock Point and upgrading what's doing at Poker Flat.
Yeah.
And some of this will be part of sensing, some of it will be part of communications, some of it will be part of testing hypersonics.
Yep.
And that's all a very exciting thing for Alaska because we're one of the best places to do it.
Exactly. I mean, we led. In 1965, we were the first university on the planet to launch rockets.
Yep.
We pioneered LNG export. We have our own spaceport. The list goes on what we can do up here. We just need a little bit of support. And again, the planning going out into the future so we don't put money into something, then withdraw from it.
Right.
Put money into something. We're seeing that with ADAC. A lot of money was put into that place. We withdrew. Now it looks like we're going back in. Let's stay there and develop the resource so that we become the best in the world at Arctic strategy, tactics, security, warfare, and Indo-Pacific.
And actually, Governor, as I think through the word that comes with it, it's just sustainment. Sustaining the initiative, if you will, sustaining the investment. Without it, we ebb and flow, and that actually puts us further behind as opposed to being consistent and sustaining.
Yeah, and it projects to the world that we're not serious about the Arctic.
Yeah, we need to be more than episodic. We've got to sustain it. Well, I think about, obviously, when we think about Homeland Defense, we're thinking about that high-end aspect, but there's also the aspect of just how we maintain this resilience and really lead the way for the rest of our country to maybe learn from our example, thinking of all the number of disasters you've gone through between natural and man-made.
Thank you.
I mean, you've just gone through a lot. You should get a chevron for everyone.
COVID was not even on that list.
About that.
So when I think about this, you were taking office when we had that big earthquake on 30th of November of 2018, and you've been involved in so many emergency response efforts across your 10-year service. You also spent nearly 2 decades living and working in Northwest Alaska's Arctic communities, and you gained obviously a deep appreciation for the capabilities of rural Alaska, and you certainly have that an exceptional, unique insight. When I think about the aspects of how important your National Guard is, and perhaps even expanding out to the Alaska Organized Militia, both for emergency response and also this preparation for Homeland Defense, When you think about this, and I know that Senator Sullivan's proposed this Alaska National Guard Rural Revival Act.
Yeah, that's great, I think.
Yeah, good. Any thoughts on this? Or things that perhaps can, as the legislators are working through this in D.C., how could you offer some words can be leveraged by these folks as they work through that?
Again, go back to some of the stuff that Meade said. You have to have a presence on the ground, right? We know we have assets under the ice. We have assets above the land. You have to have a presence on the ground. And Alaska is sparsely populated, especially in our rural areas. So I think that makes it even more important that those individuals there are integrated into disaster management, which could also mean conflict. And so by training the people, again, on how to run machinery, how to weld, how to build, how to respond medically, how to communicate with modern communication devices and technology, I think is absolutely crucial. I lived in rural Alaska for almost 20 years. My 3 girls still they work at Red Dog Mine, right? My wife's from rural Alaska. People are unbelievable, and if given an opportunity, and given a plan, and given the resources, we have some of the best trained people on the planet, especially in response to rural areas and the Arctic. I think what Senator Sullivan's doing is terrific. I think we need to do more of that. I think you're going to have a really, really well-trained population in all of the state, but in rural Alaska, where we need it probably to some degree more than others.
That's fantastic. And I couldn't say anything other than amen to the exclamation point. Meade, further adding to this?
I'm going to say this is not only a veteran of the Cold War, where I grew up. Our family had a fallout shelter plan, and we all want ourselves and our kids to live in a world of peace. Right. We actually had great hopes when we opened the border with Russia in 1988. You talk about universities. We had a lot of Russian students here, many of whom have married and have kids here. There is no human reason why we shouldn't have peace, and I know that's not what's happening with Ukraine. It's a huge human disaster.
It is.
But the fact is we are neighbors here, so we still have to cooperate on fish. We still have to cooperate on certain things, and it's important to keep lines of communication open because ultimately you're going to see a change. What Russia is doing, they themselves know is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. We should never let them get the upper hand on resource sales again, but we should not be believing that they don't exist. They do, and there's things that can be done with them. And so I don't know when I'll see this in my career again, but we did go through a period from the late 80s to probably the middle 2010s when we thought there was practical things we could do with our neighbors in the Arctic. And I hope for that day again. Mm-hmm. And I only say that because the best defense is a strong, lethal military capability, but it's also remembering and reminding people that you're better off with peace than not. Right. And Vladimir Putin could end this war in a minute. It would take a long while to build back trust. But we've there will come that time, and I just pray it happens soon.
You just got to make sure that war is not worth it.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's peace through strength.
Exactly.
Oh, that's 100% right. And I would just offer at this point, as the sand through the hourglass is winding to an end here, Lieutenant Governor, may I give you a chance for final reflection, then you'll have the last word, Governor.
Well, all I can say is Alaskans need to be very much aware of our role in security for the United States. And it's not only energy security, food security, environmental security. Those are things that we work on civilly. It's also national security. And our role in missile defense, in protecting against drones above and below the water, all of these things are coming along, and Alaskans are very, very involved. And a lot of times people can't talk about what's happening, but it's happening. And the cooperation that happens between the civil sector and the military sector is incredibly important to do it well.
we're in a period of time now where the Chinese are sending ships to the Arctic.
Yeah.
That's kind of new. The North Koreans have us under their missile umbrella. Relatively new, talking about, the last 20 years or so. That's just an example of what we don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Right.
You got to prepare for all contingencies. Again, I would say the takeaway I hope for policymakers is don't recede from Alaska. Hopefully we build up ADAC. Hopefully we have a presence, like Meet said, on the ground with ports and military assets and commercial assets. Let the world know that we care about the Arctic and Alaska. Let the world know that we just don't talk about it, but we're actually going to do something about it. I think that'll avoid conflict in the future. I think it'll be great for Alaskans, whether they're in urban Alaska or rural Alaska. I think it's a model for other Arctic nations as well. You talked about the Nordic countries. They're on the physical border, land border with Russia. We're not. But if we don't project strength, you got Korean and Chinese assets that don't really have a presence in the Nordic countries like we do.
Right.
So we're not just looking at the Russians, we're looking at other adversaries. I think Alaska has a tremendous opportunity, and I just hope that through the Trump administration we get so much done before we start to rethink how critical it is up here.
Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, thanks for joining us for this special edition of Arctic Connections webinar here at the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies. And it's been our privilege to host former Lieutenant Governor Meet Treadwell and the Governor of the great state of Alaska, the Honorable Mike Dunleavy. We look forward to you connecting with us through these Arctic Connections podcasts, live streams, and more. And then as a reminder for those folks who are invitation only, Anchorage Defense Dialogue coming up the 27th to 29th of October, Hotel Captain Cook in downtown Anchorage. Look forward to those who can join us as we'll continue the conversations through research, analysis, engagement, outreach, and educational benefit. Provide networks and solutions in support of the Arctic security and defense practitioners. I'm Church Key with the Stevens Center saying thanks for the gift of your time, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, and for the gift of time for folks who are listening in to this important conversation. Thanks much. Take care. We're out.